I watched from the kitchen doorway as Melissa signed the contract, her perfectly manicured hands sweeping across the paper with theatrical flourish. The publisher, my publisher, the one I'd spent 3 years courting, beamed at her like she'd just discovered penicillin. On the table between them sat a manuscript I knew intimately. I'd bled over every page, tested every recipe 40 times, photographed every dish at golden hour in our grandmother's kitchen. Your comfort and elegance is going to be a bestseller, Miss Chen, the publisher gushed. The way you've modernized traditional family recipes while keeping their soul intact, it's pure genius. Melissa's laugh was like wind chimes, delicate and false. Thank you. You know, cooking has always been my passion. These recipes are my heart. Your heart. The words hit me like a fist to the chest. I gripped the doorframe, my knuckles white, but neither of them glanced my way. They never did. I was the ghost sister, the one who existed only to make Melissa shine brighter. The chocolate cardamom cake especially, the publisher continued, flipping through the pages. Where did you get the inspiration? Oh, that. Melissa's smile was radiant. It's based on our grandmother's recipe, but I elevated it. Added the cardamom, refined the technique. It took me months to perfect. She was so convincing. She'd always been convincing. Beautiful, charismatic Melissa with her social media following and her sponsorship deals and her effortless way of making everyone love her. And me? I was just Sarah, the plain sister, the one who actually did the work while Melissa took the credit. But here's what Melissa didn't know. I'd already lived through this moment once before. 3 weeks ago, or 3 years from now, depending on how you measured time, I died. Not dramatically, not memorably. I simply collapsed in the kitchen after working an 18-hour shift at the restaurant where I was a line cook, my cookbook deal dead, my savings depleted, paying for Mom's medical bills that Melissa had promised to help with but never did. The paramedics said it was a heart attack. Stress, exhaustion, a body pushed beyond its limits at 28 years old. I remembered the hospital ceiling tiles. I remembered Melissa's voice saying, "Such a tragedy. She worked too hard." I remembered wanting to scream that she was the tragedy, but my voice wouldn't come. And then there was nothing. Until I woke up in my childhood bedroom, 3 years younger, with sunlight streaming through curtains I'd donated to Goodwill years ago. At first, I thought I'd dreamed my death. Then I checked my phone. The date glowed accusingly. 3 years in the past, 2 months before I'd originally given Melissa access to my recipe files just to get her opinion. 2 months before she'd copied everything, changed a few ingredient quantities, added better photos, and sold my work as her own while I was too trusting, too naive, too stupidly loving to see it coming. But this time, I saw everything clearly. I'd spent the last 2 months carefully, meticulously recreating my cookbook with one critical difference. Melissa's favorite recipe, the one dish she'd actually learned to make herself because she loved it so much, the honey lavender creme brulee that she'd begged me to teach her when we were teenagers, wasn't anywhere in my files. In fact, I'd never written it down this time. I'd never perfected it. As far as this timeline's records showed, it didn't exist yet. And I'd made absolutely certain my files were exactly where Melissa would find them, password protected with our childhood dog's name that she'd guess on the second try. "Sarah!" Melissa's voice snapped me back to the present. She was waving me over, her smile sharp. "Come congratulate me properly. Don't just lurk in the doorway like a creep." I walked into the room, schooling my features into something appropriately sisterly. "Congratulations, Mel. Your cookbook deal, it's everything you wanted." "Our family's legacy," she corrected, placing a proprietary hand on the manuscript. "You understand? These recipes belong to all of us, really. I'm just the one with the platform to share them with the world." The publisher nodded sagely, completely missing the way Melissa's eyes gleamed with triumph. She'd won again, she thought. Beaten her mediocre sister to the prize again. "When's the release date?" I asked, my voice steady. 6 months, the publisher said, and we're fast-tracking it. The market is hungry for this kind of authentic, elevated home cooking. 6 months, I repeated. "That's wonderful. I'm sure it'll be perfect." Melissa preened. She had no idea that in 6 months, her entire world was going to collapse. Because in my original timeline, Melissa's cookbook had been a massive success for about 3 months. Then food bloggers started noticing inconsistencies. Then cooking show auditions where she couldn't replicate her own recipes. Then the internet detectives who dug up my old blog posts and recipe notes with timestamps that predated her book proposal. But that scandal had taken too long to break, and by then, Melissa had already secured 2 more deals and a television spot. She'd weathered it with tears and careful PR, playing the victim of a jealous sister's accusations. And I'd been too broken, too poor, too exhausted to fight her. This time would be different. This time, I'd accelerated the timeline. Let me take you back to where this really started. Not 3 weeks ago when I died, and not 2 months ago when I woke up reborn. The real beginning was 18 years ago when Mom married Richard Chen and brought Melissa into our lives. I was 10. Melissa was 12. From the first day, everyone loved her. She was pretty, with delicate features and naturally wavy hair that photographed like a shampoo commercial. She was charming, always knowing the right thing to say to adults. And she was talented, or so everyone thought. She could sing, dance, paint. She collected hobbies like other kids collected Pokemon cards. I was none of those things. I was average-looking at best, shy, bookish. My hobby was cooking, which nobody thought was impressive for a little girl. That's just chores, Melissa's friends would laugh. But I loved it. Loved the precision, the chemistry, the way you could take raw ingredients and transform them into something that made people genuinely happy. Our grandmother, Mom's mother, not Richard's, was my ally. She taught me everything, her traditional recipes passed down through 4 generations, yes, but also technique, intuition, the way to know when something was right just by how it felt. Every Saturday, I'd go to her house and we'd cook together. Those were my happiest days. Melissa came sometimes, but she'd get bored after 20 minutes and wander off to take selfies in Grandma's garden. Cooking is so tedious, she'd complain. Why not just order takeout? Grandma would shake her head and whisper to me, "That girl doesn't understand the love you put into food." But you do, Sarah. You have the gift. When I was 16, Grandma got sick. Cancer, fast-moving, and merciless. In her final weeks, she made me promise to write down all her recipes, to preserve them, to share them with the world someday. "These recipes are stories," she'd said, her hand trembling in mine. "Our family's stories. Promise me you'll tell them." I promised. After she died, I threw myself into the project. I spent years testing and retesting, trying to capture not just the ingredients but the essence of each dish. I started a blog, small but dedicated. I worked as a line cook to learn professional techniques. I saved every penny for the photography equipment and the writing courses. Melissa, meanwhile, became an Instagram influencer. Fashion, beauty, lifestyle, she had a knack for knowing what people wanted to see. By the time she was 24, she had 200,000 followers. Brands sent her free products. She made more money from a single sponsored post than I made in a month at the restaurant. Mom was so proud. Look at what Melissa's accomplished, and she's only 24. When I mentioned my cookbook project, Mom would pat my hand absently. "That's nice, dear. Maybe Melissa can help you promote it when you're done. She's so good at social media." Richard barely acknowledged my existence. To him, I was just Mary's awkward daughter from her first marriage, the one who didn't quite fit into his new, perfect family portrait. But I didn't let it break me. I had my dream, my grandmother's legacy to protect. I worked 70-hour weeks, 40 at the restaurant, 30 on my cookbook. I developed carpal tunnel from all the typing and stirring. I lived on 4 hours of sleep and instant ramen. Finally, after 3 years, I had it. A complete manuscript. 80 recipes, each with cultural, context, and personal stories. A proposal polished to perfection. I sent it to 42 agents and publishers, 41 rejections, 1 request for the full manuscript. That 1 request came from Hartwell Publishing, a mid-sized house known for launching breakout cookbook authors. They were interested but wanted to see more. Could I send my full recipe collection, including works in progress? I was so excited, so desperate, so stupid. I told everyone at Sunday dinner. "That's wonderful," Mom exclaimed, though her attention was mostly on Melissa's latest sponsorship deal. "Cool, but," Melissa said, barely looking up from her phone. Then later, when we were alone in the kitchen cleaning up, "Can I see it? Your cookbook? I'd love to give you feedback. You know I have a good eye for what's marketable." I hesitated. Something felt off. But this was my sister, right? The girl I'd grown up with, shared a bathroom with, fought with over the remote control. Surely she wanted to help. "Sure," I said. "I'll send you the files." I gave her access to my cloud drive. Everything was there: recipes, photos, notes, drafts, the cultural stories Grandma had told me. 2 weeks later, Melissa mentioned she was working on a little cooking project. 4 weeks later, she'd hired a professional photographer. 6 weeks later, she'd secured a literary agent. 8 weeks later, she had a book deal with Hartwell Publishing, the same publisher who'd ghosted me after I'd sent my manuscript. I didn't find out until the deal was announced on her Instagram. The photo showed her holding a mock-up of the book cover, Comfort and Elegance, Modern Takes on Traditional Family Recipes by Melissa Chen. The cover featured my grandmother's kitchen, my photos, my recipes. When I confronted her, she laughed. "Sarah, don't be ridiculous. These are family recipes. They belong to all of us. Besides, I improved them, made them more accessible, more photogenic. You should be thanking me for elevating Grandma's legacy." I went to Mom. "She stole my work. Everything in that book is mine." Mom sighed like I was being particularly tiresome. "Sarah, you need to stop being jealous of your sister. She's worked very hard on this project. Just because you had a similar idea doesn't mean she stole anything. Family recipes can't be copyrighted." I went to Richard. He didn't even look up from his newspaper. "You're embarrassing yourself. Melissa has always been the creative one. Maybe you should focus on being happy for her success instead of trying to tear her down." I even tried calling the publisher. "I'm sorry," the assistant said, her voice cool and professional. "But Ms. Chen's proposal was submitted through proper channels with her agent. If you have a legal claim, you'll need to contact our legal department with documentation." Documentation? Proof? I had my blog posts time-stamped, but they were rough drafts. Melissa's versions were polished, professional, better. My photos were on my hard drive, but she'd hired a professional to recreate similar shots. The recipes themselves? As Mom had said, family recipes aren't copyrighted. I didn't have the money for a lawyer. I didn't have the energy to fight a legal battle I'd probably lose. And I didn't have any allies. Melissa's social media following meant that when I tried to tell my story online, I was immediately drowned out by her fans calling me a jealous liar. So I kept my head down, kept working, kept surviving. Melissa's cookbook launched to massive success. She got a cooking show deal, magazine features, a line of branded cookware at Target. She became the face of modern Asian American cooking, the darling of the food world. I burned out completely, developed an anxiety disorder, couldn't sleep, lost my job at the restaurant after a panic attack during dinner service, drained my savings when Mom got sick and needed expensive treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. Treatments that Melissa promised to help pay for, but never did. And then, 3 years later, I died alone on my kitchen floor, my dreams crushed, my grandmother's legacy stolen, my life amounting to nothing but a cautionary tale about trusting the wrong people. But death apparently wasn't the end. The morning after I woke up in the past, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Everything was exactly as I remembered from 3 years ago: the crack in the plaster above my bed, the sound of Mom making coffee downstairs, the way the morning light hit the photos on my dresser. It was real. I'd somehow been given a second chance. My first instinct was rage. I wanted to confront Melissa immediately to prevent everything before it started. But I forced myself to think strategically. In my first life, I'd been too trusting, too emotional, too reactive. This time, I needed to be smarter. I spent the first week just observing, remembering, planning. Melissa didn't have her book deal yet. In fact, she hadn't even pivoted to cooking content yet. Her Instagram was still focused on fashion and beauty. The cookbook wouldn't occur to her for another 2 months, not until I made the mistake of telling everyone about my publisher interest. So I moved up my timeline. I finished my cookbook proposal immediately, polishing it until it gleamed. I researched agents more carefully, found 3 who were perfect fits. I sent out my queries, and then I baited the trap. I made sure my recipe files were accessible on the family computer, backed up in a folder that Melissa would definitely snoop through. I'd spent years living with her. I knew her patterns. She was pathologically nosy, always reading my diary, checking my phone, going through my things. She couldn't help herself. But here's what I changed. I removed the honey lavender creme brulee recipe entirely. That dish was Melissa's weakness, the one dessert she'd actually learned to make properly because she loved it so much. In my first life, it had been the signature dish of her cookbook, the recipe that food bloggers raved about, the one she could actually demonstrate in cooking segments without looking incompetent. Without it, she'd be vulnerable. I also made subtle changes to several other recipes, alterations that would work in text but would be disastrous in practice if you didn't understand the underlying technique. Wrong oven temperatures that I'd corrected in handwritten notes she wouldn't see. Ingredient ratios that would fail without the specific brand I used. Techniques that required equipment I'd listed in separate files. Any competent cook would catch these issues in testing. But Melissa wasn't a competent cook. She was a good photographer, a great marketer, a natural performer, but she couldn't actually cook beyond the basics. Then I waited. It took 3 weeks. I came home from the restaurant one evening to find Melissa in an unusually good mood, humming in her room. When I checked my cloud drive logs, someone had accessed my files that afternoon while I was at work. Perfect. 2 days later, I got a response from one of my target agents. She loved the proposal. Could we set up a call? At Sunday dinner, I announced my news. Mom was distracted, Richard was dismissive, but I watched Melissa's face carefully. She smiled and congratulated me, but her eyes were calculating. A cookbook, she said brightly. What a coincidence. I've been thinking about doing something with food content. My followers are always asking about my meals. That's great, I said, playing along. You should definitely pursue it. Maybe we could collaborate, she suggested, her tone light, probing. Oh, I don't know. I've already got such a specific vision for this. But I'd love to see what you come up with. I could see the wheels turning in her head. Competition. Her little sister was going to succeed at something before she did. That couldn't happen. Over the next month, I had several calls with my agent. We refined the proposal. I signed with her officially. She started submitting to publishers. Meanwhile, I watched Melissa work. She hired a photographer, the same one from my first timeline. She started posting cooking content on Instagram, carefully staged shots that looked beautiful but revealed her limited actual skill. Her followers loved it. And then, exactly as I'd predicted, she approached me. Sarah, I need a favor. We were in the kitchen, and she leaned against the counter with studied casualness. I'm putting together a cookbook proposal, just something fun for my followers. And I'd love your expertise. Could I look at your recipe files? Just to get a sense of how to format things? I pretended to hesitate. I don't know, Mel. These recipes are really personal to me. Come on, we're sisters. I'm not going to steal your work or anything. She laughed like the idea was absurd. I just need to see the structure. Besides, I'm doing totally different. Recipes. Mine are more accessible, more social media friendly. I let her convince me, gave her access to my files, watched as she downloaded everything. She worked fast. I had to give her that. Within 6 weeks, she had an agent. Within 8 weeks, she had a publisher, Hartwell Publishing, the same house that was currently considering my proposal. But here's what Melissa didn't know. I'd already spoken with several editors at Hartwell. I'd sent them my food blog posts, time-stamped and archived. I'd documented everything. And I'd made sure they knew that my proposal was in consideration, that these were my family recipes, my work. So when Melissa's agent submitted her proposal, my recipes, my photos, my work, the editors recognized them immediately. They called me first. Ms. Chen, the senior editor said, her voice carefully professional, we've received a proposal that appears to contain substantial overlap with materials you've submitted. Can you clarify your relationship with Melissa Chen? She's my sister, I said. Those are my recipes. She accessed my files without permission and submitted them as her own work. There was a pause. I see. Are you prepared to document this? Absolutely. I sent them everything. My original blog posts dating back years, my research notes in my own handwriting, the full unedited recipe collection showing my process. I sent them screenshots of my cloud drive access logs showing exactly when Melissa had downloaded the files. I sent them photos of me in Grandma's kitchen with dates visible, testing recipes years before Melissa claimed to have developed them. The editor thanked me and said they'd be in touch. 2 days later, Melissa got a call from her agent. The deal was off. Hartwell Publishing had decided not to move forward. Melissa was devastated, but she's nothing if not resilient. She quickly pivoted, sending her proposal to other publishers. Several were interested until I reached out to each one with my documentation. Word spread quickly in the publishing world. Melissa Chen's proposal contained plagiarized material. But Melissa didn't give up. She was too proud, too convinced of her own invincibility. She found a smaller publisher, one that either didn't care or didn't do proper due diligence. They offered her a contract. She signed it, which brought us to today, to this moment, watching her celebrate in our family living room. 6 months, I said again, smiling. That's perfect timing. Because in 6 months, just as her book was launching, several things were going to happen simultaneously. First, my cookbook, the real version, the complete version, properly credited and documented, would be released by Hartwell Publishing. We'd moved quickly once we'd documented Melissa's theft. My editor had been outraged on my behalf and fast-tracked production. Second, I'd already prepared a comprehensive blog post detailing exactly what Melissa had done, with meticulous documentation, screenshots, timestamps, expert testimony from food historians confirming my research. It was ready to publish the day her book launched. Third, I'd contacted several major food bloggers and journalists, people who cared about ethics and authenticity in food media. They were already investigating, already preparing their own pieces about plagiarism in cookbook publishing. Fourth, and this was the piece de resistance, I'd reached out to food scientists and test cooks, people who actually tried recipes before recommending them. I'd sent them Melissa's cookbook manuscript. They were going to test every single recipe, and they were going to discover that half of them didn't work. Because Melissa had never actually tested anything. She'd stolen my recipes but hadn't bothered to understand them. She'd missed the crucial notes, the technique details, the specific requirements. Her book was going to be a disaster for anyone who actually tried to cook from it. In my first life, this discovery had taken months and had been gradual. This time, it would be immediate and devastating. The publisher smiled at Melissa one more time, gathered his papers, and left. Mom came in from the kitchen with champagne. Actual champagne, the expensive kind she never bought for my achievements. "To Melissa," she announced, "our family's rising star." We toasted. I sipped the champagne and said nothing. Melissa caught my eye across the room. For just a moment, something flickered in her expression, uncertainty maybe, or suspicion. She'd always been able to sense when I was thinking too much, planning too much. But then the moment passed. She raised her glass higher, took a long drink, and laughed her wind chime laugh. She had no idea that in 6 months, that laugh would turn to tears. The next few months passed in a strange double vision. I was living through events I'd experienced before, but with complete knowledge of how they'd turn out. It was disorienting and empowering in equal measure. I watched Melissa's star rise. Her Instagram following grew as she posted more cooking content. Beautiful photos of dishes she hadn't actually made, borrowed from professional food stylists, or simply taken at restaurants and implied were her own. She got brand sponsorships for kitchen equipment she didn't know how to use. She gave interviews about her culinary journey that were complete fabrications. Meanwhile, I worked quietly. I finished my cookbook with my editor, making it perfect. We included personal essays about Grandma, about learning to cook, about the importance of preserving authentic family recipes. We made sure every recipe was tested dozens of times by professional test cooks. We included proper cultural context and history. My book was called Grandmother's Table: 4 Generations of Love, Loss, and Cooking. The cover was a photo of me and Grandma in her kitchen, taken when I was 16, both of us smiling over a pot of her famous braised pork belly. It was everything I dreamed of in my first life. I also quietly paid for Mom's medical bills. Yes, she got sick in this timeline too, the same illness, before she even had to ask. I didn't tell anyone. I just took care of it. Let Melissa think she had time to plan to help before vanishing when the bill came due. And I worked on my exposé. Every evening after my restaurant shifts, I documented everything. I interviewed people who'd known Grandma, who could testify to who she'd taught which recipes. I collected blog posts and social media records. I prepared a timeline that would be impossible to dispute. I also did something new. I reached out to other people Melissa had wronged. Turns out, I wasn't her only victim. There was the photographer whose work she'd used without credit in her early Instagram days, the small business owner whose product ideas she'd copied, the former friend whose boyfriend she'd seduced just to prove she could. Melissa had left a trail of destruction in her wake, and I found every single person she'd stepped on while climbing to success. They were all eager to talk. I was building not just a case against Melissa, but a complete picture of who she really was. A serial plagiarist, a pathological liar, someone who saw other people as resources to exploit. The evidence was damning. But I waited. Timing was everything. I needed her to be at the peak of her confidence, riding high on her book deal, believing she'd won. The fall would be so much more satisfying that way. 3 months before both launches, Melissa landed a morning show cooking segment. "Come watch," she told the family, but they're going to have me make one of my signature dishes. We all gathered around the TV that morning. Mom was practically vibrating with pride. Richard nodded approvingly. I sat quietly on the couch, coffee in hand, watching. The host introduced Melissa enthusiastically. Her debut cookbook isn't even out yet, but Melissa Chen is already taking the food world by storm. Today, she's making her famous chocolate cardamom cake. My chocolate cardamom cake, I thought. Melissa smiled into the camera, radiant and confident. This recipe is very special to me. It's based on a family recipe, but I've elevated it with unexpected spices. She started cooking, and I watched with clinical interest. She was following the recipe, my recipe, but she was making mistakes. Small ones that most viewers wouldn't notice, but that any real cook would spot immediately. She overmixed the batter. She didn't bloom the cardamom properly. She used the wrong pan size. The host didn't notice. The audience didn't notice, but the cake, when it came out of the oven, wasn't quite right. The texture was off, the rise uneven. The producers had clearly had a backup cake ready, properly made by their test kitchen, and they smoothly swapped it in for the final shot. "Gorgeous," the host exclaimed over the perfect cake that Melissa hadn't actually made. At home, Mom clapped. "She's so talented." I said nothing, just took another sip of coffee. But I noticed something interesting. Melissa's relief when they swapped in the backup cake. She'd known her version wasn't right. She'd been worried. Good, she should be worried. 2 months before the launches, I got a call from my editor. "Sarah, the advance reviews are incredible. Publishers Weekly gave it a starred review. Kirkus called it a masterclass in culinary memoir. We're increasing the print run." "That's wonderful," I said, and I meant it. In my first life, I'd never gotten to experience this. The validation, the recognition, the feeling that my work mattered. "There's something else," my editor continued. "We've been hearing rumors about another cookbook coming out around the same time as yours. Same family recipe angle, similar content. Melissa Chen, isn't that your sister?" "Yes," I said carefully. Sarah, I need to ask, is there any overlap between your books?" "You could say that," I replied. "She stole my recipes and submitted them as her own work." "I have documentation." There was a pause. "How much documentation?" "Enough to end her career." Another pause, longer this time. "When were you planning to release this information?" "The day her book launches," I said. "Maximum impact." My editor's voice was thoughtful. "Sarah, I need to make sure you understand what you're doing. This will be a major scandal. It will bring a lot of attention to both your books. Some of that attention will be negative. People love to tear down women, especially sisters who are fighting." "I know," I said. "But the truth matters more than public opinion. She stole from me, from our grandmother. She's built her entire brand on lies. Someone has to stop her." "All right," my editor said. "Just promise me you'll be careful, and that you'll let our publicity team help manage the fallout." "I promise." 1 month before the launches, Melissa threw herself a pre-publication party. It was extravagant. A rented event space, catered food, ironic since she couldn't cook it herself, an open bar, Instagram-friendly decor. She'd invited everyone, family, friends, her substantial social media following. You have to come, Mom insisted. It's a family celebration. I went. Of course I went. I needed to see this, to remember why I was doing what I was doing. The party was packed. Melissa held court in the center, gorgeous in a designer dress, accepting congratulations like a queen receiving tribute. Her agent was there, her publisher, several minor celebrities from her social media circle. I stood in the corner with a glass of wine, watching. Sarah, Melissa appeared beside me, slightly tipsy, her arm looping through mine. There's my brilliant little sister. You know, none of this would have been possible without you. I looked at her carefully. What do you mean? Well, you inspired me. She laughed, loud enough for nearby people to hear. Watching you work so hard on your little cooking project, it made me think I could do something similar. You're like my muse. The gall, the absolute breathtaking gall. Several people were listening now, smiling at this touching sister moment. Although, Melissa continued, her voice taking on a slightly sharper edge, I have to say, I'm a little worried about you. I heard your book is coming out around the same time as mine. People might think you're trying to ride my coattails, you know? Capitalizing on my success? There it was. The knife slipped between the ribs with a smile. Around us, people looked uncomfortable. The implication was clear. I was the copycat, the jealous little sister trying to steal Melissa's thunder. I could have exploded. In my first life, I would have. I would have made a scene, cried, tried to explain, and been dismissed as hysterical, but I'd learned, I'd died and been reborn with the gift of perspective. So instead, I smiled. You know what, Mel? I'm not worried. I think when people read both our books, they'll know exactly who did the real work. Her eyes narrowed slightly. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing at all. I raised my glass in a toast. To your success. May you get everything you deserve. We clinked glasses and I took a long drink, holding her gaze. She looked away first. Launch day arrived like a storm on the horizon. Inevitable, terrifying, exhilarating. Both books hit shelves on the same Tuesday in September. Mine was released by Hartwell Publishing, with proper publicity and distribution. Hers was released by Clearwater Press, a smaller house that had clearly cut corners on fact-checking. I woke up early that morning, my stomach tight with anticipation. This was it, the moment I'd been planning for months. I checked social media first. Melissa had been up since midnight, posting unboxing videos of her author copies, selfies with the book, excited messages from her followers. Her hashtag had comfort and elegance was trending. Her fans were thrilled, already posting photos of themselves buying copies at bookstores. I felt a moment of doubt. She looked so happy, so triumphant. Was I really going to destroy that? Then I remembered. She'd destroyed me first. She'd stolen my work, my dreams, my grandmother's legacy. She'd let me die alone and exhausted and broken, and she'd barely shed a tear at my funeral. This wasn't revenge. This was justice. I posted my first message at 9 a.m. before I could second-guess myself. It was a thread on Twitter, carefully crafted, starting simple. Today, 2 cookbooks launch with very similar content. My book, Grandmother's Table, and my sister Melissa Chen's book, Comfort and Elegance. This is the story of how my sister stole my work, thread. Then I laid it out step by step, the timeline of my recipe development, the blog posts dating back years, the access logs showing when she'd downloaded my files, the side-by-side listen, comparisons of her recipes versus mine. The testimony from food historians and family friends. I included everything, screenshots, photos, documents. I made it impossible to deny. The thread went viral within an hour. At 11 a.m., the first major food blogger picked up the story. This is a serious case of plagiarism in cookbook publishing. Everyone needs to see this. At 1 p.m., a journalist from Food and Wine called me. Ms. Chen, can we interview you about this situation? By 3 p.m., it was everywhere. Food media, general media, Twitter, Instagram. Melissa's comment sections filled with accusations and angry messages. Her publisher released a statement saying they were looking into these serious allegations. My phone rang constantly. Interview requests, messages of support, people sharing their own stories of being plagiarized or stolen from by Melissa. And then the recipe failures started rolling in. The food bloggers who'd received advance copies and tried to cook from Melissa's book started posting. This chocolate cardamom cake recipe doesn't work. The ratios are wrong. The braised short ribs are inedible. Way too much soy sauce. Half these recipes are disasters. Did anyone test these? The test cooks I'd coordinated with published their findings. Of the 80 recipes in Melissa's book, 47 had significant errors that made them fail in testing. The book was essentially unusable as an actual cookbook. In contrast, reviews of my book praised the carefully tested recipes, the cultural authenticity, the clear instructions. This is what cookbook publishing should be, one reviewer wrote. By evening, the scandal had eclipsed everything else. Melissa Chinesa fraud trended worldwide. Her publisher suspended her contract, her agent dropped her. Brands started pulling sponsorships. I watched it all unfold with a strange sense of detachment. This was what I'd wanted, what I'd planned for. But seeing it actually happen was surreal. At 8 p.m., Melissa called me. I let it ring through to voicemail. She called again and again. Finally, I answered. Sarah, her voice was ragged, tears distorting the words. Sarah, please, you have to help me. You have to tell people this is all a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? I kept my voice level. You stole my work, Melissa. You copied my recipes, submitted them as your own, and built your entire brand on my labor. What part of that is a misunderstanding? I thought they were family recipes. I thought we could both use them. Don't lie to me. Not anymore. You knew exactly what you were doing. Sarah, please. She was crying hard now. Yeah, you're ruining my life. Everything I've worked for, everything you stole, I corrected. And I'm not ruining your life. You did that yourself. I'm just making sure everyone knows the truth. But I'm your sister. The word hit me like a slap. Sister. In my first life, that word had been a chain around my neck, a reason to forgive, to enable to let myself be destroyed for the sake of family harmony. Not anymore. You stopped being my sister the moment you decided your success was more important than my dignity, I said quietly. Goodbye, Melissa. I hung up. She tried to call back, but I blocked her number. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed scrolling through the responses to my thread, the messages of support, the angry denunciations of Melissa. It was overwhelming. Around 2 a.m., Mom called. Sarah, what have you done? Her voice was sharp, accusatory. Your sister is in pieces. She's talking about hurting herself. How could you do this to her? How could I? I stopped, took a breath. Mom, she stole from me for years. She built her career on my work. Family recipes aren't stealing. They belong to all of us. Her entire book was mine. Not just the recipes, the research, the stories, the photos, everything. And you know it. You've always known it. Silence on the other end. Mom, I loved you, I continued, my voice breaking. I killed myself working to make you proud. I paid your medical bills when Melissa promised to help and didn't. I did everything I could to be a good daughter, and you never once chose me over her. That's not fair. It's completely fair. In my entire life, you've never once stood up for me. Never once asked Melissa to treat me better. Never once acknowledged that I was the one doing the work while she took the credit. Sarah, I'm done, Mom. I'm done being the supporting character in Melissa's story. I'm done sacrificing myself for a family that never valued me. I hung up, blocked her number too. Then I turned off my phone, closed my laptop, and cried. Not for Melissa and not for Mom, but for the version of myself who'd died 3 years from now, exhausted and alone and convinced she'd wasted her life. I cried for her. And then I let her go. The next few weeks were chaos. The scandal dominated food media circles. Melissa tried to defend herself in a tearful Instagram video claiming she'd been inspired by family recipes and hadn't meant to plagiarize. But the evidence was too damning. Food bloggers, journalists, even other cookbook authors came forward to dissect her claims. Her publisher pulped most of the print run and terminated her contract. She lost all her sponsorships. Her social media following, which had peaked at 500,000, dropped by 200,000 almost overnight. Meanwhile, my book became a bestseller. The scandal had brought it massive attention, yes, but the book itself was genuinely good. Reviews were glowing. People connected with the personal stories, loved the authentic recipes, appreciated the careful research. I did interviews for NPR, Bon Appetit, The New York Times. I talked about the importance of crediting work, about the epidemic of recipe plagiarism, about protecting cultural heritage in cooking. I became, ironically, exactly what Melissa had wanted to be, a respected voice in food media. 2 months after the launch, I got a call from a television producer. They wanted to develop a cooking show around my book, something authentic, educational, focused on technique and tradition rather than just pretty food shots. I said yes. 3 months after the launch, Melissa made one last attempt to salvage her reputation. She published a long apology on Medium, claiming she'd made mistakes but deserved forgiveness. She talked about mental health struggles, family pressure, the competitive nature of the food industry. It was manipulative and self-serving, but I saw a few people sharing it sympathetically, so I responded, not angrily, not emotionally, just factually. I published my complete documentation of her plagiarism, including pieces I hadn't shared before, messages where she'd explicitly discussed how to make my recipes look different enough to avoid detection, testimonies from people she'd wronged in other contexts, a pattern of behavior spanning years. I didn't condemn her. I just showed who she really was and let people draw their own conclusions. The apology didn't save her. If anything, it made things worse by reminding people of the scandal just as it was starting to fade from news cycles. 4 months after the launch, Melissa moved out of the family house. I heard through Richard, who sent me a stiff, formal email, that she'd relocated to Portland, was trying to start fresh, away from the media scrutiny. Good, I thought. Maybe some time away from the spotlight would teach her something. But I doubted it. 6 months after the launch, my cookbook won a James Beard Award. I accepted it on stage in front of hundreds of people in the food industry, many of whom I'd idolized in my first life. In my acceptance speech, I talked about my grandmother, about the importance of honoring the people who teach us, about the responsibility we have to tell true stories about food and culture. I didn't mention Melissa. I didn't need to. Everyone knew the subtext. After the ceremony, an older woman approached me. She had kind eyes and silver hair, and something about her seemed familiar. "Sarah Chen," she said warmly. "I'm Julia Howard. I was your grandmother's college roommate many years ago." My throat tightened. "You knew Grandma?" "I did. And I need to tell you, she would be so proud of you. Not just for this award, but for fighting to preserve the integrity of her recipes. She always said you had her spirit." I managed not to cry, but it was close. "Thank you," I whispered. Julia squeezed my hand. "Your grandmother also told me once that the best revenge is living well. It looks like you took that advice." I laughed, surprised. "She said that?" "She was wiser than people gave her credit for." Julia smiled. "Take care of yourself, Sarah, and keep cooking. The world needs more people who care about doing things right." That night, alone in my hotel room with my James Beard Award on the dresser, I thought about my grandmother, about everything she'd taught me, not just about cooking, but about perseverance, about pride in your work, about staying true to yourself. And I thought about my first life, the one where I died exhausted and broken. That Sarah would be amazed by all of this, I realized. The success, the recognition, the vindication. But more than that, she'd be amazed that I'd chosen myself. That I'd stopped letting family loyalty destroy me. That I'd fought back instead of lying down and accepting defeat. "We made it, Grandma," I said softly to the empty room. I kept my promise. A year after the launch, my life had transformed completely. My cookbook had sold over 300,000 copies and was being translated into 6 languages. My cooking show, Grandmother's Table, had been picked up for a second season. I'd been able to quit the restaurant and focus on writing and cooking full time. I'd also moved out of the family house into my own apartment, a beautiful space with a huge kitchen where I could develop new recipes and film content. It was mine, paid for with money I'd earned from my own work. Mom and Richard had tried to reconcile with me a few times. Mom sent emails asking to move past this unpleasantness. Richard suggested we put family first and forgive. I responded politely but firmly. I was open to a relationship if they could acknowledge what had happened and apologize genuinely. They never did. So, I maintained distance. It hurt less than I'd expected. Maybe because I'd already grieved the loss of them in my first life. Or maybe because I'd finally learned that blood doesn't entitle people to abuse you. Melissa, I heard through industry gossip, was struggling. She'd tried to rebrand several times, but the plagiarism scandal followed her everywhere. She couldn't get publishing deals, couldn't rebuild her social media following, couldn't escape the reputation she'd earned. Part of me felt bad for her. She was still my sister after all, and I remembered the good times from childhood before everything went wrong. But mostly, I felt nothing. She'd made her choices. Now she had to live with the consequences. I, meanwhile, was thriving. I'd started dating someone. A pastry chef I'd met through work, someone kind and talented who loved food as much as I did. We'd cook together in my kitchen, experimenting with flavors, laughing over failed attempts, celebrating successes. In my first life, I'd been too exhausted for romance, too broken to let anyone in. This time, I was whole enough to be vulnerable. I'd also reconnected with extended family I'd lost touch with, people who'd known and loved my grandmother. They shared stories with me, added to my collection of recipes, helped me preserve our family's culinary heritage properly. And I'd started a scholarship program for young cooks from underserved communities, funded by a portion of my book royalties. It was named after my grandmother, the Mei Chen Culinary Scholarship. If I couldn't have her here to see my success, I could at least make sure her legacy helped others. One evening, about 14 months after the book launch, I was in my kitchen testing a new recipe, a variation on Grandma's soup dumplings, when my phone rang. Unknown number, but something made me answer. Hello? Sarah? It was Melissa. Her voice was tentative, stripped of its usual confidence. Please don't hang up. I considered it, but curiosity won out. What do you want? I wanted to apologize, a real apology, not like before. I've been in therapy and I'm starting to understand what I did to you. How much I hurt you. I stayed silent, waiting. I was jealous of you, she continued. I know that sounds crazy. You were always the quiet one, the one in the background. But you had something I never did. Actual talent, dedication, the respect of people who matter. And I couldn't stand it. So you tried to destroy me. Yes, her voice broke. I did. And I'm sorry. I know saying sorry doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I understand what I did was wrong. Not just unethical or illegal, but cruel. You were my sister, and I treated you like an obstacle to climb over. I closed my eyes, processing. This was what I'd wanted in my first life. Acknowledgement, apology, recognition of the harm she'd caused. But now that I had it, it felt hollow. Melissa, I said slowly, I appreciate the apology. I do. But I don't forgive you. I understand. No, listen. I don't forgive you because forgiveness would imply we could go back to how things were. And we can't. You didn't just steal my recipes. You stole years of my life. In another timeline, you succeeded in destroying me completely. I can't forget that. Silence on the other end. But, I continued, I don't hate you either. I've moved past you. I've built a life I'm proud of, a career that matters to me. You're just not part of it anymore. So this is it? Her voice was small. We're never going to be sisters again? We haven't been sisters for a long time, Mel. You made sure of that. I heard her crying softly. I hope someday you can forgive me, even if we never speak again. I hope you can let go of the anger. I already have, I said. That's why I can have this conversation without screaming at you. The anger's gone, so is the pain. All that's left is indifference. That's somehow worse, she whispered. Maybe. I looked around my kitchen, at the life I'd built from ashes. But it's where we are. Take care of yourself, Melissa. I mean that genuinely. I hope you find a way to build something real, something that's actually yours. Sarah, goodbye. I hung up. This time it felt final. I went back to my soup dumplings, focusing on the precise pleating technique Grandma had taught me. My hands moved automatically, muscle memory built over thousands of repetitions. My phone buzzed with a text from my boyfriend. Still coming over tonight? I made that mango sticky rice you love. I smiled and replied, wouldn't miss it. 2 years after my book launch, I published my second cookbook, Grandmother's Table, The Next Generation. It featured new recipes I developed, modern interpretations of traditional techniques, and essays about carrying culinary traditions forward while making them your own. It debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. My cooking show was renewed for a 4th season. I'd been nominated for another James Beard Award. I'd signed a deal to develop a line of specialty ingredients. The specific brands and types I used in my recipes sourced from small producers and family businesses. Everything I'd dreamed of in my first life had come true, and then some. The media occasionally still mentioned the plagiarism scandal when profiling me, but now it was framed as part of my origin story. The talented cook who overcame betrayal to achieve success. I'd stopped being the sister who was stolen from and become the award-winning cookbook author. On the 2-year anniversary of my first book's publication, I visited my grandmother's grave. I brought soup dumplings from a recipe in my new book, a variation she would have loved. We did it, I told the headstone. I kept my promise, I told our stories. I preserved the recipes. And I made sure everyone knows they're yours, ours. The wind rustled through the cemetery trees, and I imagined it was her approval. Thank you for teaching me, I continued, not just how to cook, but how to value my own work, how to have pride in what I create. You always believed in me, even when no one else did. I sat there for a long time, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. In my first life, I died at 28 with nothing to show for my years of work except exhaustion and broken dreams. In this life, at 27, I had everything: success, recognition, peace, love, purpose. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd had to die to learn how to live. But maybe that was the point. Maybe we all get so caught up in surviving, in people-pleasing, in maintaining dysfunctional relationships, that we forget we're allowed to choose ourselves. We're allowed to fight for our dreams. We're allowed to cut toxic people out of our lives, even if they're family, especially if they're family. 3 years after the launch, I was invited to give the commencement speech at my culinary school alma mater. Standing at that podium, looking out at hundreds of young, hopeful faces, I thought about what I wish someone had told me when I was their age. Success isn't about being the most talented, I said. It's about being the most persistent, the most authentic, the most willing to protect your work and stand up for yourself. I paused, gathering my thoughts. Someone will try to take credit for your achievements. Maybe a colleague, maybe a competitor, maybe someone you love. When that happens, you have 2 choices: let them or fight back. In my early 20s, I let someone steal my work. It broke me. It took me years to recover. I didn't mention the rebirth, obviously. But I learned something crucial. Protecting your work isn't selfishness, it's self-respect. And you teach people how to treat you. So, my advice is this: document everything. Keep records. Trust your instincts when someone's treatment of you doesn't match their words. And when someone shows you who they really are, believe them. I looked out at the sea of faces, hoping at least a few of them would remember this when they needed it. But also, don't let other people's cruelty make you cruel. Don't let their theft turn you into a thief. Build something so authentic, so undeniably yours, that no one can ever take credit for it. The audience applauded. After the ceremony, dozens of students came up to thank me, to share their own stories of being taken advantage of, to ask for advice. I stayed for hours, talking to each one, offering what wisdom I could. That night, I got an email from Melissa. The subject line was, "I saw your speech." I almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity won out. The email was short. "Sarah, I watched your commencement speech online. You were right about everything. I showed you who I really was, and you finally believed me. I'm sorry it took losing you for me to understand what I'd become. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness or reconciliation. I know that ship has sailed. I just wanted you to know that watching you succeed, really succeed, with work that's authentically yours, has been the hardest and most deserved punishment I could have received. I'm trying to build something real now, something honest. It's slow going and I'll never have what you have. But maybe that's okay. Maybe I don't deserve what you have. Anyway, congratulations on everything. You earned it, Melissa." I read it twice, then closed my laptop. She was right. She didn't deserve what I had. Not because she was inherently worthless, but because she'd chosen shortcuts over substance, theft over creation, ego over integrity. Maybe someday she'd build something real. Maybe she'd find redemption. But that was her journey, not mine. Mine was already complete. 5 years after my first book launched, I hosted a party to celebrate not just the anniversary, but everything that had come after. My third cookbook had just released. My cooking show had won an Emmy. The May Chen Culinary Scholarship had sent 37 students to culinary school. My apartment was packed with people, friends, colleagues, food writers, chefs I admired. My boyfriend, now fiancé, was in the kitchen helping prepare food. The walls were covered with photos, me and Grandma in her kitchen, me accepting awards, me teaching classes, me surrounded by scholarship recipients. It was everything I'd never dared to dream in my first life. Someone tapped a glass for attention. My editor stood up, smiling broadly. "I'd like to make a toast," she announced. 5 years ago, Sarah Chen walked into my office with a cookbook proposal and a story about plagiarism and family betrayal. I'll be honest, I was skeptical. The food industry has a lot of drama, and family disputes are messy. She raised her glass toward me. But Sarah didn't just prove her case. She transformed a scandal into a movement for integrity in food media. She taught us all that recipes are stories, that credit matters, that authenticity can't be stolen. More than that, she showed us what it looks like to rise above adversity with grace. To build something so good, so real, that it speaks for itself. Everyone raised their glasses. "To Sarah Chen," my editor continued, "the most principled person I know and one hell of a cook." "To Sarah," everyone echoed. I blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the love in the room. These people weren't here because they pitied me or because I was famous. They were here because they genuinely respected my work and valued me as a person. In my first life, I died alone. In this life, I was surrounded by community. Later that evening, as people were leaving and the party wound down, I found myself alone in the kitchen, washing dishes and thinking about the two versions of my life. In the first, I'd trusted too much, sacrificed too much, let people walk all over me until there was nothing left. In the second, I'd used knowledge from the first to protect myself, to fight back, to build something that couldn't be taken away. But here's what I'd realized over the past 5 years. The rebirth wasn't just about getting revenge on Melissa. It was about getting a second chance to value myself. The real difference between my two lives wasn't that I'd defeated Melissa in this one. It was that I'd finally learned to believe I deserved good things, deserved to be credited for my work, deserved to prioritize my well-being over toxic family loyalty, deserved to be happy. That was the true gift of rebirth. Not foreknowledge, but self-knowledge. My fiancé came into the kitchen, wrapping his arms around me from behind. Amazing party. It really was, I agreed, leaning back into his embrace. What are you thinking about? Just how different things could have been if I'd made different choices. Any regrets? I thought about Melissa, about mom, about the family relationships I'd permanently severed, about the version of myself who'd died exhausted and alone. No, I said finally, no regrets. Everything that happened led me here, and here is exactly where I want to be. He kissed the top of my head. Good, because I can't imagine my life without you in it. I smiled, turning to face him. You know what the best part is? What? This is only the beginning. I have so many more recipes to share, so many more students to teach, so many more books to write, and the story isn't over. No, he agreed, smiling. It's just getting started. And he was right. My first life had been a tragedy, cut short by exploitation and exhaustion. But my second life was a triumph. I'd taken the pain and betrayal of my first life and transformed it into purpose. I'd turned theft into legacy, defeat into victory, death into rebirth. And most importantly, I'd learned that the sweetest revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's building a life so good, so authentic, so completely yours that they can never touch it. Every time Melissa Googled my name, and I knew she did, she'd see everything she could have had if she'd just done the work herself. Every award, every achievement, every moment of genuine respect and recognition. That was the real curse I'd left in her cookbook. Not a missing recipe, but a constant reminder of what integrity looks like. And that was worth more than any honey lavender creme brulee. As I stood in my kitchen that night, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived, I thought about my grandmother one more time. I kept my promise, I whispered. I told our stories, and I made sure no one could ever steal them again. Somewhere, I imagined her smiling. The dishes were done. The party was over. Tomorrow, I'd wake up and start work on my next project, a documentary series about immigrant food traditions and the families who preserve them. But tonight, I simply stood in my beautiful kitchen, mine, earned, deserved, and savored the taste of victory. It was delicious.